welcome to Scatter Plots. Today we're going to quickly review what a scatter plot is. Then we are going to talk about the correlation coefficient, and what that is how tightly data is related to each other. Next we're going to talk about a trend line, which is also known as the line of best fit. Then we're going to move on to causation and association. Then we're going to wrap it up with steps you're going to use to find all of this stuff on the Inspire calculator. So, 8.1, Scatterplot Review, Bivariate Data. All that bivariate data means is a collection of paired variable values that are graphed on a coordinate grid, as you can see here. On these three graphs, notice they are not a function. Most scatter plots are not because the data overlays. However, there are trends. There's something called a positive trend, which is going to be this first graph because it starts low on the lower left and it increases as you move towards the right. A negative trend is the opposite. It's high on the left side and then it goes down. The last graph, we can't really make any lines, so it's going to be no trend. Let's go ahead and look at example 1. For example 1, this table presents two variable data for 7 different cities in the northern hemisphere. And notice we have some cities listed here, but what our variables are going to be are the values, because that's what we're going to use to make the scatter plot. Our first value is going to be latitude. We're going to let that be x, which is going to be along the x-axis. And then next we have average annual temperature. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my Inspire app, I'm going to hit New, and then I'm going to hit List in Spreadsheets. And now when this data comes up, in that tag right there, that's where you input the values. You can just simply put X and Y. So I could start typing latitude here, but I just can put X. And then over here, that's going to be the Y values, which is going to be the air temp. I do not do anything in that row where the equal sign is. I just go down to where the cells are numbered and I'm going to key in all of this information. So let me just key in the air temps real quick that were recorded for example 1. And now we're going to go back up and I am going to the Add button. And this time, I am going to select Data and Statistics. When you get to the screen, notice things are just kind of floating everywhere. What we need to do is we need to designate the Y and the X axis. So what we're going to do is we're just going to tap. That's going to be the Y axis. Notice there's some shifting. Down here is the X axis. And as you can see, if I zoom out a little bit, those trends, for example 1, that's a negative trend. It's negative trend. It's a little loose. It's not tight together. It doesn't have a strong correlation. We'll talk about that later, but it is definitely a negative trend. So in your example, for example 1, I asked you to state what the correlation coefficient is. Let's go ahead and talk about what a correlation coefficient is, and then you can go back and answer number 1. Correlation coefficient. What that is that represents just a number that indicates how tight the data forms a line. So as you can see right here, this is a pretty strong negative correlation, just like a negative trend. We say that it's a correlation because all of the data lines fit pretty close to a trend line if the trend line was drawn. A correlation coefficient can range anywhere to a -1 all the way to a +1, but it does not go beyond that. So a strong negative correlation, notice that it's tight to the line. The information kind of hugs the line. Same for a positive correlation. For a positive correlation, the R is close to 1. For a weak correlation, or something where it's not really around the line, but you can see a negative trend, which was our example 1. For example 1, I'm going to say the correlation coefficient is a -0.4. 4. That's just my estimate, but if you kind of see right here that the weak negative correlation R is close to negative 0.5, I'm going to say that latitude and air temperature correlation was negative. I'm going to say it has a negative correlation of a negative 4/10. Make sure you have recorded that on your packet. So it is kind of like slope, only in the fact that a negative means it goes downhill and a positive means it goes uphill, but that's really to the extent of the similarity. Just remember, a correlation with a number of 0 indicates that there is no trend. Okay, let's go ahead and move on here. Example 2. For example 2, we're going to see what happens when we plant a tree, and then after we plant the tree, we are going to see what happens, how the height is affected. It's either going to be a positive or a negative correlation. So the variables are going to be years and heights. So I'm going to go to New, List in Spreadsheets. And if you wanted to, instead of doing X and Y, you can type in years and height for the independent and the dependent axis. Let me key in these values real quick. And then from there, it's not going to be action. Remember, it's not the toolbar. You actually go to where it says add, and then you're going to select data and statistics. However, for the sake of time, I'm not going to do this part. So for example 2, where it asks for the positive or negative correlation and the estimate, you are going to say, Ms. Harrington, cut that out. That way I'll know you're watching the video. Good job. Good for you. All right, let's kind of move on here. What I wanted to talk about was the line of best fit. So back in the first 6 weeks, when we first did scatter plots, I asked you to find 2 points on a line, connect them with a ruler, and then you would actually find the line using slope-intercept form. However, what we're going to do now is we're going to use the calculator to find that line, and that is called linear regression. And the Inspire app is going to do that for us. So, also remember, the closer the correlation coefficient is to 1 or -1, the more closely the equation models the data. But remember that the correlation coefficient only goes from -1 to +1. And if it's 0, that is no correlation. It's pretty important. Okay, let's go ahead and look at example 3. For example 3, we are looking at the table shows the amount of money made by movies in the United States. Using a graphing calculator to write an equation for the best fit line for the data, find and interpret the correlation coefficient. And the 2 sets of variables or the bivariate data that we have are years and revenue. And notice that revenue is in billions. So I'm going to go to New, List in Spreadsheets, and I'm going to go to the row that has the tag. That's where I indicate my X and my Y. Here's something I wanted to show you. If you do a long press on the X key, more soft keys will pop up and you could input the Y right there. You do not have to go to the ABC mode of the calculator. It's all right there for you. So I'm just going to make the other one a Y value, and let me key in this data real quick for the years and then for the revenue in billions. Okay, moving on. Remember, I go to Add. From Add, I hit the pink icon, that's Data and Statistics. Now, the variables that were plotted are just kind of floating around. So what we're going to do is we're going to anchor them according to the X and Y axis. So vertical is always Y, horizontal is always X. So now you can see that this trend does look like it's going to be negative. Let's talk about regression. So I hit the tools finally, and I went to Analyze, and now I showed the linear regression. However, you have to make sure that your diagnostics are on in order for this R value to show up. If it doesn't show up, I'm going to show you how to fix that. So notice they give us r squared. Now you would think that you would hit the gear to kind of get that r to show up, but it is not on this screen. So I'm going to go ahead and hit done.